I am very excited about this conversation today. It is a personal passion of mine to start a community conversation worldwide on how we can sort of in practice effectively, something fell down, but I think it's okay, effectively scale data cultures and data quality so that specifically I'm thinking about also event data collection so that this isn't a major headache that everyone hates, but something that sort of people feel is approachable. We released a paper on this. It's called Data Mesh for Event-Based Data, and it is a recipe to mature data cultures from what we call the Wild West to data quality at scale. And this is a talk about that. But a quick, who am I? I am Steph. I am the CEO and co-founder of Avo, but I was thinking about just replacing this CEO and co-founder thing with like, I am a blob of 15 years of pain for data quality issues and building data cultures. And that's what this is based on. This is based on that pain and battle scars that I know we all carry. And I'm here to sort of relate that to you and your experience and start a conversation again. What does Avo do? We build tools that help enterprises like Adobe, Moody's, Rocket Mortgage, IKEA, Mercedes-Benz, but also startups and scale-ups, guarantee event data quality upstream. And I'll take a quick sort of stitch back to the previous lecture. It was just such a great, I felt like it was like a great intro lecture to what I'm talking about here today, because we don't just care about building tools, we really care about culture, and we really care about the relationships that are happening here behind this. But and that sort of ties into what do we mean by upstream? I'm going to say this. The old way of approaching data is to think about just collecting data. And then you track all sorts of user activity, and then you figure out what you're going to do with it later. And you sort of have to figure out what you have to do with the data to be able to use it in the way that you want to use it. And that is why a lot of data quality initiatives in general, they are reactive in nature. They are about building Frankensteinian pipelines, data pipelines, to make data usable after the fact. And that does not scale, it doesn't work, and it's holding a lot of companies back. And so now, I mean, I think every single talk in this conference has AI in the title. And we have teams and systems today consuming data faster than ever with AI, personalization, real-time optimization. This slowness of reacting to data quality after the fact is not feasible anymore. And so I am here to talk about this. And I'm going to quickly go through how we should be challenging this framing. So when we look at this process of sort of data collection, we go through and plan the data collection, we implement the tracking, we collect the data, and then we build data products. Most data quality platforms and data quality solutions, and to actually Oriel's point earlier, is sort of data quality management happens where we are building the data products, or just before, or in the warehouse. We're monitoring what's in the warehouse. But high impact data is not just collected, it is crafted, and it means that quality starts when you're planning. That's when quality starts. And this talk is a lot about that and why sort of data mesh and data contracts, they start at that stage. And those are the high impact, high leverage things that prevent you from having really bad data downstream. I am really excited to see this playing out in action in huge companies and the community around us. And I love this comment from Archana, who runs data science and AI at Rocket Mortgage. And she sort of calls this out as the data mesh piece that's been missing for event architecture, so that companies can build their AI factories that fuel growth. And I really appreciate that. And I want to just start by talking about what does it take to get high quality event data. And I want to take one customer as an example. This is a B2B enterprise companies in the financial sector with thousands of employees. They have a range of products and services that they've acquired throughout the years. They have central data services teams, or a central data services team that set this goal. Enable event tracking from ideation to usage in one business day. And when we say from ideation to usage, we mean the entire process of sort of defining the goal of a feature release. That's the product manager. If they're doing their job, they're doing that. Then outlining the data goals, specifying the metrics, specifying or defining the necessary events and implementing the analytics and shipping the feature. And then analyzing the results and acting on that, iterating on the product. And I would argue that this is actually an incredibly easy job to do, to make this success. Enable event tracking from ideation to usage in one business day, as long as you don't mind shipping shitty data. So our suggestion was to reframe this to enable high quality event tracking from ideation to usage in one business day. And this is where it gets tricky, because this is a huge company, thousands of employees, they want consistent data across multiple products. That's not easy. And this is a talk really about that. I want to touch base though on why should we even care, really? And I'm not gonna spend time on that. I know people know about that, but just sort of like, let's remember that. Because I know we all want to roll our eyes when we're thinking about data quality. We don't want to think about it. It's just a means to an end, right? But the ability to activate data at scale depends on having cohesive data across a whole organization. And with AI, this is just starting to be table stakes. And I love this from James Betker, an engineer at OpenAI. This is from James's blog post, "The it in AI models is the data set." And he's saying that model behavior is not determined by architecture, hyperparameters, or optimizer choices. It's determined by your data set and nothing else. He's saying that his observation after working at OpenAI was that every model trained on the same data set converges to the same point at some point. The only differentiator is the data set. And that's huge, and it means that you have to have quality data sets. That's the stakes. Okay. So, going into, I want to take a step back and I want to introduce the stages of data culture maturity that companies typically evolve through. Usually when they're starting out, they start out in this winging it state. They're just, they're not even collecting data, they're sort of just trying to ship, maybe to the App Store, and they're just trying to ask people, what do you think about what I just shipped, Okay. Then they start collecting data, and commonly this happens in like a Wild West state. And we refer to it as the Wild West because there are no rules, and everyone is out for themselves, right? And that's fun and it's great. Teams are usually and hopefully able to rely on their own data, but the ability to leverage it across organizations is not possible. And I'm going to show you why. In the Wild West, you might have a product team shipping new features. If the PM is doing their job, they are defining a feature goal. Then we skip any sort of schema definition or any documentation of like deciding how to measure things and how to implement analytics. The developer just implements it. It's like a cowboy team that just runs on their own. And then they ship the feature and they build the data products. This is great, and it works really well for them. They might have some discrepancies between Android and iOS, but it's fine for them, When this starts to suck and break is when some poor soul is tasked with doing some sort of a central data product. So then you have someone receives a request for a data product, someone at the data team probably. They have to figure out what data exists. They have to request from that team the missing data or ask for it to be fixed. That team has moved beyond collecting that data ages ago, and you have to negotiate the prioritization with that team to get that data fixed before you're able to start even building your data products. It's a huge hassle for the data team and the cowboy team, the onboarding team or the checkout team or whoever. They don't want to go back to what they were doing weeks or months ago. Nobody loves this. And let's not forget that we're talking about company-wide analysis, so it's not just one cowboy team. It's the CRM cowboys, it's the search cowboys, it's the checkout cowboys. They're all running on their own. And it means that this is sort of, the analyst needs to negotiate this priority with multiple teams. It's basically like a major blocker for building central data products or data products that depend on company-wide data. And I don't know, it means probably they have like 7 events for the same thing. They have to fix it by making some downstream transformation. They have to maybe join it together in some sort of a monster SQL query that then has to be extended in the next feature release because it broke in a new way then. And it's just like, nobody loves this, it's a nightmare, and it's very inefficient. And it becomes less and less feasible to scale efforts, like machine learning, AI, or any sort of like holistic analysis that the company needs or requires. So this takes us to the centralized governance. The need is these company-wide data products. Okay, I want to say, so to combat this situation, they sort of introduced this some sort of a centralized governance. But before getting into that, I want to call out that companies can stay in the Wild West for ages and feel good. I am not here to tell you to get out of the Wild West, and there might not be appetite at the company to get out of the Wild West. At certain stages, it's actually right to cut corners. That's the right way to go. You do it in technology, organizational building. You, of course, do it in data. So you're building consciously tech debt, you're building organizational debt, and you're building data debt. And that's fine, and it works. What you're really just trying to do is just try to refrain from taking on too much debt. That's what you're trying to do at that stage. And I'll go into, like in the recipe that we'll cover later in this talk, I'll call out what are the things that are sort of low-hanging, that you can stay in the Wild West, but you can still sort of do some low-hanging things that prevent you from building up too much debt. But at some point, building central data products just is not happening because the data is so shitty. And that's when you need to standardize the data. That's that need to standardize. And the only way to start that process is, in the beginning, is a centralized way. There's no way to skip that step. I have not seen that work, at least. So, going back to the Wild West, you remember how these steps got skipped. These define metrics, define events, validate tracking, all that stuff. In the centralized, some sort of a central team, some data team here, they own those steps now. They make sure the data is collected consistently across the organization. There's an added step now. There is added friction, but it's done because they now want better data. So they're investing a little bit more time to get more data. It's adding friction and annoyance, probably, but it's the enabler of being able to build good data products. The product team requests tracking from the central team. The data team aligns with them on the requirements. They convert the requirements back into data structures and hand them back over to the product team who implement the tracking. And then they are actually typically hands-on to validate the tracking as well. They're a part of the QA process. Okay, this is great. So, in this example I mentioned at the beginning, that company, that financial company, they had a central team and they were spending 80% of their time handling tracking spec requests. That's a lot of very smart brains doing a lot of work that computers potentially could be able to do, but also if you coach people to do it the right way and do it well, they shouldn't have to do it that way. they're expensive educations. This is just really inefficient. And it's so frustrating. It's a lot of bottlenecks. And they were unable to spend time on building data infrastructure or doing experimental analysis. Or one of the investments that they wanted to make was help teams do more in backend tracking, for example. Like build the infrastructure to help teams implement backend tracking. But they were just stuck in this reactive mode, handling tracking spec requests. And I saw the Slack channel about this. I saw the tools that they, like how they've automated the Jira ticket management for this. And like they went through incredible work to build a smooth process for this, but it was still taking so much time. And nobody loved that. But the thing also about this is what we call the data governance dilemma. Because it takes so much time, there is so much bottleneck, we end up also having cowboys cowboying again. They skip the process. Because in the data governance dilemma, we are choosing between fast product release with shitty data, or slower product release, but with better data. So that's the dilemma there. What should I choose? And it's difficult to do that. You have a product manager that's on a deadline, and you forgot to think about this, and you're like the eighth person in line for the data team's request. So you just skip it and you do it on your own, right? And so in that sort of human-based stage, centralized governance, I'm considering whether I should rename it like human-based governance or process-based governance or something like that. It's like we're going through it and we're trying to do our best, but there has to be a better way, right? It does not scale. And so what's happening there is they need at-scale data activation. It's not scaling with them. And so they introduce then, and I'm also looking for like a better term maybe for this stage. I really loved self-serve at some point because this is all about sort of empowering teams to run on their own a little bit faster. But come talk to me if you have other thoughts. I'm thinking at-scale governance, system-based governance, things like that. We can talk about it in the office hour. Okay, so what's happening here? What is the data team doing here? They are implementing data mesh principles and data contracts. They're trying to do things at a better scale. Usually, to get to this stage, you need these things, and so you need to enforce data mesh and stuff with a data contract and a working agreement. Really, I'm not going to go deep into the data mesh principles, but to summarize, you want to be treating your data as a product. You want your data infrastructure accessible and self-serve so your teams are able to run on their own. You want to institute I almost want to edit this live actually, federated computational governance, system-based governance, not just sort of like humans managing governance, but computational governance. And you also want your teams to be able to run on their own with their own data, so domain-oriented ownership. Those are the sort of principles, okay? And then data contracts, you need to enforce them with some kind of a data contract or a formal agreement. And it just means that there are sort of systems in place that allow data producers and data consumers to align on what needs to happen. Oriel was talking about this, some sort of an SLA. When does the data need to be ready? What does the structure look like? All sorts of things like that. And so they're just formal agreements about that. And we'll talk more about that. But this can be a YAML file on Git, but it can also just be like a working agreement type of thing. Like when I do this, this is the process for that. Anywhere in between. But what does this look like in the process? Okay, so the self-serve governance. It means that the onboarding team is no longer cowboying. They just really efficiently go through all of these steps because there are systems in place that allow them to run through them fast. They define the feature goal, they define the metrics, they define the events, they review and approve, and often and typically the data team is quite involved still in that step, so they're able to hand over the creation to the domain teams, but then they're still involved as like coaches, basically. And then they implement, and then they ship, and then they're able to build data products. And the data team is there to define the process, to systemize the standards, to systemize the enforcement, to systemize the implementation, to systemize the validation, and then to help people build data products, right? And they're able to do this at scale because they're not bottlenecks in every single step. They're there as enablers and then like as a foundation to the rest of the organization. And it's magical to see this happen. Like it's just, and obviously this doesn't happen overnight, and that's sort of also what this talk is about, is how can we get there, and how can we get there in stages. So I want to now quickly, and we're getting to the recipe, but this is a good time to summarize what are the triggers for transitioning from one stage to the next. Because when we review the recipe, I want us all to remember, we're not doing data quality for data quality's sake. That's really important. We're not doing data quality for data quality's sake. And I am a data scientist, or like I was a data practitioner for a really long time. I'm a mathematician and a philosopher. And I have a difficult time not having systems, you know. I think all of us data people, we can get pretty, exact, and we get pedantic, And so it's really annoying for us when things aren't according to the system. But we have to choose our battles. It's really important. And so we need to act on data quality when we have a need, and when the need is blocked by data quality issues. So these are the needs. It's from winging it, you go there when you need quantitative data. From the Wild West, you go there when there is this need for company-wide data products. From the centralized governance, you go there when you are at a point where you really need at-scale data activation. It's just not working anymore, right? Okay, so quickly, one more thing that I want to review before we go into the recipe is sort of the symptoms of bad data product management. And this is sort of like inspired a little bit in the white paper, which I have a bunch of copies of. Yeah, Halla has copies of there. You can grab a copy there in the back or at our booth downstairs after this. We frame it a little bit inspired by the Ben Horowitz post, good product manager, bad product manager. But here I'm mainly talking about the bad, because the recipe is then the good, really. Okay, so it's sort of the symptoms of when your data as a product isn't being managed effectively, I would say. So first red flag is when you're tracking for coverage rather than for impact. Your data is treated as like a box to check off rather than a driver of business outcomes. So you have teams collecting generic events like button clicked. And I mean, I'm not fully opposed to button clicked or like navigation. Like I have events about just like a generic navigation event that can help me fill in the blanks. But it's really important to track with intent, I would say. And these are like events without context. They're drowning in noise. Your company is sitting on a pile of data that feels abundant, but it's not useful, right? Okay. In the same vein, you might have some documentation for events, but not how they relate to business outcomes or how they relate to metrics. No one knows what an active user actually means, for example. So you're tracking like maybe, page viewed, or you're tracking like game started, or you're tracking app opened, and then there are 15 different people in the same day using these 3 different events to define active user, and then they're reporting on completely different numbers because there's no central definition for what data you literally use for the business outcomes that you're measuring. And that means that every analysis starts with debating definitions instead of extracting insights. And that's really frustrating. So another red flag is your event taxonomy is a mess. And it's, you're tracking 5 or 15 events for the same thing. It's leading to fractured data sets. that you have to waste time cleaning up before you make your data usable. And what I mean specifically by this, and we'll go through the low-hanging ones in the recipe, is you don't have a naming convention. So you have snake case and camel case and uppercase and title case and lowercase and sentence case for the same thing. But then also you don't have the naming convention in the sense that this part of the product is always called game. It's never called match, right? And so that deciding these things will prevent you from having duplicates. And always calling them, I'll go through this better in the recipe, but these are the examples of the mess that you have. And the root of this problem is often poor documentation, right? So you're manually copying schema definitions from across tools. From a JIRA ticket, you're finding something in a JIRA ticket that was created. You have something in a spreadsheet. You have 5, 10, 40, 50 spreadsheets. No one knows which documentation is correct. And that's really difficult because you cannot ensure consistency if you don't know what already exists when you're creating new types of data. So this also contributes to a vicious cycle around ownership. And that's what really made me happy about Oriel talking about this. You need to have the ownership to be able to say, this is broken. What do I do about this? Who's going to do something about it? And if you don't have any documentation, you can't know who to talk to when things break, right? And so tracking changes without any stakeholders knowing. That's happening all over the business. It's like someone just edits an event or moves it around or whatever. And there was something that was really depending on that event staying the way it was, even though maybe it was broken, but some dashboard was depending on a pipeline that fixed that event in a specific way. So knowing when things are changing is really important. And this is sort of, broken data waits quietly until it derails your initiatives. It's just lying there and you don't really even find out about it until you're trying to use it. And then you have to wait for weeks or months until you even have a starting point for having new versions of that data that you can use. So it could be broken for months before anyone notices. And these are the red flags that I wanted to call out. And now for the recipe. The recipe for data mesh for event-based data. And we cover this also in the white paper, and I'd love to talk more about it with anyone who's interested. So please come find me or find me on LinkedIn or whatever if you want to talk about it. Okay, so I want to sort of split this up into, it's 10 items, and they're quite related. It's basically like the key ingredients there on the right, and then sort of like a secret sauce, basically, or like the next level on the left. And we can think about it like this. The left one, and it'll make sense when I show it all to you, the need there is the company-wide data products. You're either in the Wild West or in the centralized governance or trying to get there. You're trying to unlock good data. That's it. This is process-based, this is human-based. This is going to be human-based mostly. So this is basically the good version of tracking for cover. The bad one is tracking for coverage. The good one is design data based on use cases, right? It's really important. So instead of having a generic button clicked, have events that sort of explain the actions that the user is taking, the intent of the user. They are completing a purchase or whatever they're doing. And sort of think about the metrics that you're about to use the data for before you implement it, instead of tracking for coverage. Standardize naming and abstraction levels. So that's the naming that I was talking about earlier. This is are you going to name your events with object and action or action and object? And there are pros and cons to all of it. I'm a big fan of object action because there are so many systems in our lives that still go by alphabet. Like things are sorted by alphabet, and that means that in those systems, the events that are related to game they will all be there together. The events that are related to the same thing, they will all be there together. It helps discovery. The abstraction level then is like, instead of having account created email, account created text, account created, or like phone number, account created via Facebook or whatever, you have a single account created and then you have a property that describes where the account was created. And committing to this is what you need to prevent the fact that you will have duplicate versions of the same event. And standardizing this. And these are the two that I was mentioning earlier, that where you can live in the Wild West, and these are like low-hanging fruit that you can apply to your business without introducing major friction. Like you can do this and commit to this and decide this and have this as like a, hey, you know, this is the way that we want to do this, but you don't have to be pedantic about it, but like, or like really accurate about it, or angry when it gets messed up, but it's like this is the way that we want to do this. We can stay in the Wild West and you can run on your own, but you can have these definitions. So it's not like, it's not a big lift. It's just decide on it and then move forward. Okay, so then we move on to, this is something that you probably will not be trying to do this in the Wild West. This is something that you'll be doing in centralized governance. Build some sort of a single source of truth. So instead of having everything living everywhere, living in Jira and in Slack and in multiple spreadsheets, make sure there is at least a single spreadsheet, if it's a spreadsheet, or a JSON file on Git, or a YAML file on Git, or just whatever works so that you can iterate on the schemas for your events in collaboration with the people that need to know about it. And then the right side will also, the right side will also be excited because that's like the next level of these things. Okay, and then establish and document ownership. So in the single source of truth, try to make it clear who is the owner of this event, or this property, or this metric, and also who is a stakeholder in it. So not just who is responsible for it breaking, but also like who wants to know if I make a change to it. Okay, and then the data observability and alerting. I completely agree with Oriel and like probably everyone in this. Like data observability is just a tiny part of this, right? But it can really help to at least know when data breaks as soon as it breaks, rather than when you depend on it, when you're trying to get it to, when you're trying to use it in your AI model, or you're trying to build some sort of data product on it. So data observability is still reactive. That's reactive mode, and the rest are like proactive things. It's still reactive, but what I like to say about it is like, fire extinguishers are also reactive, but you still want them in your life, right? You want to be able to respond when things go in a different direction to what you wanted them to go. Even though you typically don't want your house to catch fire, you want to catch it if it does, right? Okay, so let's go to the things that make this scale. The need here, again, is at scale, timely data activation. These bottlenecks that I displayed in the graph earlier, they're not working anymore. This centralized data team is using freaking 80% of their time to do something, to manage these processes. And here we're trying to unlock good data fast. Okay, so not only designing data based on use cases, but actually documenting that as well. Document the metrics or the business outcomes that are associated with the events. Make sure it's documented along with that. This not only acts as a source of truth so people know what an active user is, it actually also helps engineers when they're implementing analytics events in code to make better decisions about how to implement those events. They understand what's at stake. Okay, so not only standardize or create or define something, but find some way to enforce those data standards. And if you're running things in a spreadsheet, it means you're going to create a really advanced like text validation input or whatever, you know. Like find some way so people cannot create duplicate versions of the same events in the definition stage. Because people blame developers or product engineers on these duplicative events, but they actually happen very like a huge reason for why they happen is that people don't know what already exists when they start defining things. Okay. Not only having a single source of truth is the objective here, but also make sure you're source controlling that. So that's where the spreadsheet stops being enough. You want to have something that behaves like a GitHub. You want to have versioning of your schemas. You want to understand when things were changing. You want to be able to be in draft mode for multiple teams at the same time without that interacting or sort of disturbing each other. And really importantly also, in my opinion, sync those schemas to other sources where schemas live. So data planning is one point in time, but then you have the, the select stars of the world and like the data catalogs of the world about what's supposed to be accessible in some downstream table or about what's supposed to be happening in some transition layer in dbt, wherever. You want those schemas to get synced to that location so that when you're working on a transition, you have the latest version of your event in place. Okay. Accountability systems and alerts. So not only establishing ownership and documenting it, but making sure that the owners actually get alerts when someone is making changes to their schemas. And then again, instead of just reactive observability, actually preventing them upstream. So some sort of a way to, for example, observe code changes or make sure you have like debuggers available to your developers, things that really make your developers' lives easier, make their lives easier when they're implementing their analytics implementation. Okay, again, this recipe is available in the white paper, and very excited to talk about it with whoever wants to talk about it. And one of the things that I'm looking for to get out of here is this conversation, like what resonates here, where are you, what do you think is accessible to implement? Should we turn this into a template that's sort of like extended in more ways with more examples, things like that. So would love your thoughts on this. I also want to say here, where do I really start? This is the final thing in this presentation, because it can seem overwhelming and it's easy for me to put these things on paper, but it's another thing to put them in practice, and I understand that. But I've done it many times, and eventually even started a company that helps people do it at scale. So it's manageable and it is doable, and it's doable in steps. And that's the purpose of this part. Where do I really start? It depends. I know that's a shitty answer, but that's the reality. And so I want to leave you with 4 questions that help you determine where to start, and then invite you to a conversation about it. So finding your starting point. Data quality is a means to an end, like I already talked about. What are you trying to achieve? So don't do data quality for the data quality's sake. Use data quality incidents as opportunity to advocate for small iterations. So when things break, use that opportunity to be like, hey, let's fix this thing, and let's make these minor changes in the process. And then focus on what will help you get where you need to be at this point in time. Identify the appetite, both your appetite and the organization's appetite. Don't order the big plate if you only have room for snacks, if you're only hungry for snacks. Products are iterative. So your data is a product. What is your first iteration? The trap that we see so many times is people are like, okay, now we go into this planning phase about how we are going to get to data mesh or whatever. Of course, nobody calls it data mesh in their initiative, but and we see people get stuck for 1.5 years doing this, just in planning, and they don't know where to start. But remember, products are iterative. Your data as a product is no exception, including the processes. Just identify these small iterations that you can make today. Understand where you are today. Focus on what's right for that stage. Don't over-engineer. You might be dipping your toes from being fully centralized into being decentralized. That doesn't mean that tomorrow you'll start trusting everyone to manage their own data. You might just find one team where the product manager is data passionate and you're coaching them to take more ownership of what they're doing. Data is a team sport. I want to really highlight this. And that's like to the talk that was happening here earlier by Oriel. There's a lot of stakeholders involved, and you need to identify what you can do on your own versus what you need relationship building and advocacy for. And sort of then, again, you have to identify the appetite. If you're now at a point in time in the organization where the people that you depend on for some change don't have an appetite for change, then focus on something else for now. And then finally, scaling data, and I think we all agree on this. Scaling data requires tools and processes and culture. That's what it requires. So what will move the needle for you today is the question. And that's a mix of sort of increasing motivation and reducing friction. So you may currently have tools or processes mapped out that don't have adoption. So what do you do about that? Then you work on your culture. Find the data curious people and coach them and get them excited. Or you may have appetite, but it's so filled with friction that people don't do it. So lower the friction by improving tools. With that, I'm just going to ask, are you ready to dig in? You can get your copy of the paper or join us for a conversation. Thank you.